Hello and welcome to the 12 Months Marathon Podcast with me, John Hill, the running podcast for the over 35s with Marathon Dreams, episode 48, an introduction to getting faster. Now, I imagine a lot of people listening to this will be quite captivated by the topic of how to get faster as a runner, and I'm going to cover that in a brief podcast today. I've also done a detailed coaching session on getting faster, a Getting Faster Masterclass on my Plus channel, so if you want to subscribe to that for $7 a month, not only does it help support the podcast, but it'll also give you access to coaching that I only give to my running coaching clients, and you can get the link for that in the description. You just need to click that, $7 a month, and there's tons of resource in there, including a masterclass on how to get faster as well. So what's going on with me at the moment? So I am training for Hyrox in July. I've got another half marathon coming up in July as well, start of July on the cards before then, and then I'm going to be hitting the Hyrox training quite hard, 12-week plan for then, and I've got another half marathon in September, which is the Great North Run. So there's potentially two half marathons and definitely a Hyrox coming up for me this year. And my goal really is to get myself in Hyrox shape, which is a different type of training and conditioning to marathons. And one of the biggest mistakes that I've made in the past, and I will do a podcast on this if you're interested, is approaching Hyrox with a marathon mindset. And I'll just leave it at that. We'll come back to that if that's relevant. But actually, funnily enough, getting faster is part of that training cycle. And ironically, one of the reasons why I believe that I didn't perform at my best the last time I did Hyrox in October last year was I couldn't run fast just because of the fact that I torn my hamstring in the September, and a month, 5 weeks later, I was doing Hyrox, so I wasn't able to do the running element, the fast running element for a little bit, and I was a little bit nervous on it. So it shows the importance of learning how to run faster. So what I'm going to do on this very quick podcast with you today is just to give you some of the key principles so you understand this concept in your head. For those of you who listen for a while, you'll know that I don't get into the weeds too much on this stuff because I think we get too lost in information and we get too lost in stuff that's not practical. The reason why some people gravitate towards me, people call me relatable, call me simple, is because everything that I've done has always been based on practice. It's never been based on reading up too much. It's just been based on doing and feeling, because I think the first thing you need to remember is if you're going to run faster, you need to be really comfortable with yourself. And you need to know yourself very, very well. And you need to know what your limits and your capacities are. And sometimes we over-rely on tech. We over-rely on heart rates, and we over-rely on a watch telling us or an app telling us what our performance level is. And we don't trust ourselves enough. And I think to run faster, you have to trust yourself quite a bit. And that's the first important principle. And a lot of people, sometimes people don't like to hear that because it's like they can't then allocate blame or allocate responsibility elsewhere, which is not often a deliberate thing. It's often accidental, but it does happen quite a bit. People will allocate blame to an app, or they'll allocate blame to a watch, or they'll allocate blame to something to stop them achieving their potential. And it's not up to any technology to help you run faster. It's up to you. It's not up to shoes to help you run faster. I've done all of my runs in decent shoes, but I've never ran in super shoes or anything like that. And potentially, of course, would that improve my performance? Yes, but I perform really, really well. Even one of my fastest ever marathons, my first proper attempt at a sub 3, I ran that in Nike Free, and if you know what they are, then that was quite the achievement, because they're the ones where there's no support or no arch, and I still managed to do a 3:03. So we've got the first principle of getting faster is you got to know yourself. You have to know yourself really, really well as part of the process, and as part of that, as a little asterisk and a second point to that, you've got to set it as a goal. Now, again, some of this stuff might sound obvious, but you'll be amazed how many people I speak to about running at any level who don't actually have getting faster really, and I say really, as a goal of theirs. It's sort of what happens is they get too caught up with comparison. They get too caught up, again, with apps like Strava and comparing themselves to people and using what I call incorrect comparison. Because I think we are naturally inclined to compare ourselves as humans and also as runners, but I think you have to make the correct comparisons, because it's okay to compare yourself potentially to someone who's in exactly the same situation as you as a benchmark without too much emotional attachment to it. But I think sometimes we use that comparison to make ourselves believe that we need to get faster when we don't, because the quickest way to hate running is to run faster. I promise you that. Distance, most people can cope with. But when it comes to getting faster, that's what wipes a lot of people out. Because in very simple terms, what's the first thing that you lose when you run faster is your breathing. And breathing's very calming. For those of you who meditate, or those of you who've worked on your breathing, you know, or done breath work, you know how calming breathing is. So if you run faster, you're going to lose your breathing quite quickly, which means you're going to panic and get overwhelmed and stop. So that's why it's very, very important. You have to set it as a goal first and foremost, and a realistic goal based on you. That's the first thing. The second thing you need to be able to do to run faster is to be patient with yourself, because this is going to take time. I mean that, you know, I primarily deal with the over 35s, people perhaps even new to running at that age, and perhaps people who want to do quite stretching things. And we can really damage ourselves psychologically and sometimes even physically by trying to rush, pun intended. Because I was doing a coaching session with my coaching community a few days ago as I record this, and one of the things I said based on a question that I had was, you have to be patient with yourself. Because let's say you go out and do like an interval session, for example, where you've got to run really, really fast. And I mean fast, I don't mean like, you know, I mean fast, and we'll talk about that in a sec. But it's not always going to be a home run. Yeah, it's not always going to bring the house down. Sometimes you're going to try it and it's not going to work. I remember I tried to do a little bit of an interval session about 3 weeks after my illness when I had the flu back in March, and I tried to do an interval session I think the start of April, and I couldn't do it. I was going to do 2 minutes times 10. I got nowhere near it. I think I did 4 rounds, and I probably could have carried on, but I was wiped. I mean, it was like you could tell that my respiratory wasn't up to it. So you have to be patient, and you have to gradually work on this and look for the little tweaks. Yeah. If you want to keep things simple, the way I like to look at this, I keep things really simple when it comes to pace work, and you've got to have a framework to work off. So first and foremost, this is where a good plan comes in, because a good plan, a get faster plan. So I'll let you in behind the magic curtain a little bit. So when I coach people, we've got 2 types of plans. We've got how to get round a run and how to get faster at a run. Okay, I think that's what people need. I think we need to keep it nice and simple, and we need to keep it in a sense of let's just get people round a particular distance, or if they want to get faster, let's bring in those elements. Now, if somebody asks me, can we amalgamate the two or intertwine the two? Of course we can, but we want to try and keep this as simple as possible. Because if you're going to get faster, as my thing goes, I say to everybody when I speak to them, particularly about running coaching, is my goal is maximum execution, minimum information. So let's get you doing. Let's get you coming back and asking questions. And then once you've done that, we can then tweak and refine, because that's all I've done when it comes to getting faster. So you've got to keep it nice and simple. So this is where a good plan comes in, because it should lay out interval-based sessions within that plan. And if it does, which it should, particularly if you're looking to get faster, you should look at 3 types of runs. So you've got easy runs, you've got comfortably hard or tempo runs, and then you've got interval sessions. I like to keep it in those 3 headings. Okay. Now, easy runs, a lot of people ask about this. Could you do zone 2? Potentially. Depends on the tech you're using, and it depends on whether that's accurate, because I believe that sometimes when people get frustrated with that, it's because they're placing too much attachment on the method. And what I mean by that is they're saying, well, I've been told to run in zone 2. Well, actually, yes, but if you're actually struggling and getting and psychologically beating yourself up because you're trying to hit this magical thing versus, well, actually, what's an easy pace for me? But I think feels better. Because here's an easy one for you. I heard this a few years ago, and I've always tried to stick to it within reason, is your easy pace should be a minute to 90 seconds slower than your race pace. So let's say you're going for a 4-hour marathon. I think that's about 9-minute miles, I think, off the top of my head. Correct me if I'm wrong there. So your easy pace should be 10 to 10.5 minute miles. Yeah, that's easy. Everyone can do that, can't they? But if we start messing around with erratic technology, talking about zone 2, and then people get stuck, and then people say silly things like, not their fault. I mean that personally. They'll say, well, I felt fine, but my heart rate was too high. Well, for me, that's an oxymoron, and that's placing too much emphasis on the tech. But I'm not going to let this turn into another zone 2 rant. So that's the first thing to consider. So easy runs should be a minute to 90 seconds. Everybody can do that. Everybody can follow that. And then so if you do that, that's ideally what your race pace should be. A minute to 90 seconds above your intended race pace should be an easy run. A tempo run is comfortably hard. So, for example, a tempo run would be probably a little bit quicker than your race pace, but not as quick as something you can't deal with. Does that make sense? So, typically in my plan, I will do a tempo half marathon as part of my marathon training plan, which is probably 20 to 30 seconds faster than my marathon pace. And that's just a guide. I'm not saying that's a rule of thumb. I'm not saying that's the thing, but that's how I tend to look at it, a tempo run. Now, you might get some runs where on a plan where it says do 5 minutes walk, 5 minutes slow, 5 minutes tempo, and then you could say, well, okay, what's comfortably hard? And comfortably hard is you can pretty much maintain it for the length of time. That's how I look at comfortably hard. And that's, I think, for example, if you're training for a half, you should probably try and PB your 10K as part of that training cycle. If you're training for a 10K, you should probably look to PB your 5K. If you're training for a marathon, you should probably look to either PB or get close to PB in your half marathon time in the training cycle, in my opinion. That's very simplistic, and obviously we'd need to build you a proper plan and work with you on that, but that gives you an idea. And then your interval sessions, nice and simple. Your interval sessions are hard and fast, basically, nice and simple. So there are 3 ways I like to look at that. So you've got more rest to work. So for example, 2 minutes rest or 2 minutes slow, should I say, 1 minute work. Then you've got 1-to-1, which is like 1 minute rest, 1 minute work. And then you've got the thing that I believe really gets you faster, which is shorter rest periods to work. So 30 seconds rest, 1 minute work as an example, yeah, or half a mile rest to a mile repeat. Does that make sense? And that's the one that I think really does get you faster. So that's the way I like to look at the intervals. And when we say intervals, the best way to do that is the talk test. And the talk test is if you finish what you think is a threshold or an interval session, like a minute or 2 minutes, whatever it might be, if you could talk after it, potentially it's not fast enough. Okay, that's the best way, because we're dealing with 2 types of things here. We're dealing with aerobic and anaerobic. Anaerobic means with oxygen. Anaerobic means without oxygen. Of course, you're always with oxygen, but it's an easy way. So it's working off a different system. So you're gassed. So aerobic is that slow, that's it. But if you're really, really gassed and you're struggling to breathe, that's an interval session. And we don't mean struggling to breathe and you can't breathe, but the breath's erratic and it's all over the place. And that for me is an interval type of session, and those sessions are particularly important if you're looking to PB longer distance runs, because they build up your lung capacity and they build up your tolerance levels. And what you want to do with the interval stuff and the speed work at the end is you want to make your race pace easier than it seems. So let's say your marathon pace, go back to the 9 minute mile example, your race pace is 9 minute miles. Well, your threshold pace should be like 7.5 as an example, right? Because if you did a 7.5 minute mile, a 9 minute mile feels easier. Does that make sense? There's a really big psychological component to this, which I believe. I don't like to get too technical, because I think when you're trying to get faster, you do need to run a lot on feel, okay? And then I think that's why having a feedback loop or some kind of support from maybe a running group or somebody there to help you, or even a coach, for example, that's good, because then you can speak to them about it. So what I did for a couple of my guys in my group who were having a bit of a wobble when it came to running faster, because again, we go back to attaching so much emotion to it and all that, I just said, look, here's the key principles, and then let's get a feedback loop in place, and then you can feedback and we can tweak things as you go, and then it's about patience and working on it. So just to wrap up on this one, again, if you do want the detailed version, you can sign up to the paid podcast, $7 a month. You're going to get there's a lot of decent content in there, including this. So please do that if you want to A, support the show, and B, also make sure you get that content. So the 3 key principles are, number 1, I will give you 3 key principles. Make it a goal of yours. So make sure it's a clear goal of yours that you do actually want to get faster and you're not doing it for the wrong reasons. The second thing is be patient with yourself while you're training for it, and know that it will take time for you to get a clear understanding of what your thresholds look like and what pace work looks like for you. And then finally, understand the different brackets in a simplistic sense and make sure you're using the right data alongside the way you feel to assess your paces and things like that. Okay, so that's an introduction to speed work. Like I said, I'd appreciate if you want to subscribe to the paid podcast. That'd be great. If not, that's fine as well. Keep listening to this, and obviously keep following me on Instagram at 12 Months to Marathon. You'll get little snippets like that. Of course, if you want to have a chat about coaching, we can have a chat. No obligation, of course. I'd happily talk to you. We're getting into autumn marathon season now, coming into the summer, so October marathons, September marathons, and so on. So if you want to have a chat about that and getting some coaching and support, I'd happily talk to you. You can contact me over on Instagram at 12 Months to Marathon as normal. Don't forget to follow me. The star ratings on Spotify particularly are very useful, as are the ratings on Apple. So make sure you do rate this podcast. Give it a rating for me, whatever you feel. Obviously the better rating, the better. I'll appreciate that. But make sure you give it a rating, because that's really useful, and share it with your friends. And as always, I very much appreciate you listening. Thanks for all the support and messages and interactions. They do mean a lot, and I really, really appreciate it. So thank you very much for listening as always, and I'll speak to you all very soon indeed.